Shalom Aleichem, everybody. We're up to Shevuos Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph by the Mishnah. 4 lines from the top. Zug the Heilige Mishnah. Mashbi'ani Aleichem em loy sevoyu us iduni. Guy imposes a Shevuah on 2 Eidim saying, if you don't come to testify, or please come testify, Sha'omer ish ploni litni Messiah zuz v'lenosan, that you heard this guy, Ish Pliny, promised me a gift of Messiah Zuz, and he didn't give it to me yet. And the Eidim say, no, we never heard that, right? B'sheker, they swear, Shevuos Eidus, Hareilu P'turim, they don't bring a carbon. She'ein chayoven elo al tviyas mammon kepikadon. They're only chayev if they're kaifer on a tviyas mammon, which is like pikadon. What's pikadon? Pikadon is that Tveya gave it to the nitva to hold, right? He mamish has money by him, not that the guy promised him a gift. Mashbi'an alechem shteit le'edus shtavai siduni. What about a guy who says, in the future, if you know Eidus for me, didn't happen, nothing happened yet, then you should come testify for me. I read L'Pturim, they're part of carbon, they should cut Meshvula Eidus. In other words, in the end, they did know Eidus, and then they were kaifer with the Shevuah, they're potter. Why? Because the Shevuah that the Teveya made on them was before they actually knew the Eidus. And we learn from a pasuk that has to be Eidus Kedemas L'Shevuah. We'll see in the Gemara. 3rd case in the Mishnah. Amud b'veis hakneses. A Teveya stands up, gives a clap on the beam, and he says, "Va'omar mashbi'ani aleichem." The whole kehilas hakodesh over here, shematim yoidin li eidus. Anybody who knows eidus from Mishtavai Seduni, harei l'pturin. And then 2 guys were kaifer with the Shevuos eidus, and they lied. They're still part from the carbon. Why? Ache miskaven lehem. Till the Teveya intentionally specifies these 2 guys for the Shevuah, their potter. Amr l'shnayim, 4th case. Mashbi'an alechem ish ploni ploni, shemati yoid le'edus shtavei siduni. He says to these 2 guys that if you know Eidus, they should come give testimony. Shevuah she'einanu yoid l'chedus. They make a Shevuah falsely stating that they don't know any Eidus for him. V'hem yoidin lo Eidus, they lied obviously, but it's Eid mapi Eid. They didn't see it with their own eyes, with their own flesh eyes, they heard it from somebody else. Or they're disqualified from saying Eidus, either Karev or Apostle, Arelu P'turim, then they're Potter because they have to be Royal Lahagodas Eidus. 5th case in the Mishnah, Shalach Bi'ad Avdo, Yashamal Nitba Mashbi'ani Aleichem, Shematim Yoidin Le'edus, Shetevoya Siduhu, or the Nitba says, I'm making you a Shevuah on behalf of the Teveya, that if you know Eidus for the Teveya against me, for that guy, that you should come give Eidus, and they swear falsely. Shevuos Eidus are L'Pturim, they're potter from a carbon. Achi Yishmu Mepi Teveya. We had this earlier. They have to hear it mamish from the mouth of the Teveya. The Teveya himself has to be Teveya the Eidus. Tonu Rabbanon. Now the Gemara is going to quote a bunch of brises that echo the halachas we just learned in the Mishnah with sources, with psukim. Tonu Rabbanon. First halach in the Mishnah was, we learned in the bris as well. Mashbi'ani alechem l'Teveya sedina shamish pleni l'Messiah zuz v'lenosan. Please give testimony on my behalf that you heard somebody promise me a gift, and he didn't give it to me. And then they denied ever hearing that or seeing that, and they made a Shevuah on it, falsely. So Yochel Yuchayav, and I would have thought they're Chayav Karban. Tamad Lamer Sechto Sechto. The Torah says the word Sechto by Shevuos Eidus and by Shevuos Apikodim. L'Gzei Rishav. It's coming to teach Gzei Rishav. Nemer kan Sechto, nemer Lalon Sechto. Ma'al Halon b'Tviyas Moment v'Yeshloi. Just like by Shevuos Apikodim. When the Torah is Mechayev you on a Shevuah, that's in a case where your Teveya moment, the Mafkar is Teveya moment from the Nifkat, V'yeshla, and he has moment by him. He gave him that money, he gave him that pikadon. Afkan, so to B'Shevuos Eidus, Eidim are only Chayev, a carbon if they're Kaifer and a Tviyas moment, but Tviyas moment V'yeshla. When the Teveya actually gave money to the Nitba, not when the Nitba just promised him a gift. Second halacha was Mashbi'an alechem k'shteitle Eidus in the future. And they find out in the future Eidus, and they swear they're Kaifer on that Tviyah. They're potter. Ton Rabbanan. Mashbi'an alechem k'shteitle Eidus shtavei siduni, Yochel Yuchayav, and Tamad Loimer v'shama kol Allah, v'hu eid oira yada. Misha kadma eidus l'shvuah, which means v'hu eid means he was already an aid before the Shevuah. Before the Shevuah, before the Teveya was Teveya that they testified on his behalf, they already knew the eidus. So it has to be kadma eidus l'shvuah, v'lo shekadma shvuah l'eidus. Not if a Teveya made a Shevuah, that if in the future you know eidus, then you should come testify for me. That doesn't work. 3rd case in the Mishnah was Amud Beis HaKnesses. V'Omer Mishbi'ani Aleichem. He made a collective Shevuah on anybody here that knows Eidus. Doesn't work. Amar Shmuel, Afilu Eidav B'nein. Even if the Eidim are in the Kehillah, in the community, in the Shul, in the Beis HaKnesses, by the minyan, still, they are potter if the Shevuah was targeted for everybody. It was a collective Shevuah. That's the pshita. What do you mean? Shmuel doesn't have to tell me that. That's the chiddush of the Mishnah. What's Shmuel adding? This is letzricha the koya luvayu. Doesn't I don't need Shmuel's chiddush. Shmuel is talking about an additional step over here, where the teveya is mamash standing next to the Edom. Ma'aratema, then I would have thought, command the Amalu Dami. It's like he's talking to them directly, because they're standing next to him. Kamash Shmuel, no. Since he didn't single them out in his words, then it doesn't work. Tainam hachi, a brisa backing up the chiddush of Shmuel. Ra siya shabnei adam oimde ve'edav beinein v'amlam meshba'an lechem atam yoidim le'edas shtavai siduni yochli yechayaven tamud lemer v'hu eid. Right? He has to single them out. He has to specify that he wants these people, the Edom themselves, not to a collective community. Gemara says, Yachal afilo omar kala oimden kan. Let's say he would have said, anyone, even those who stand right next to me, and the Edom are talking next to him. So I would have thought that even in such a case he's potter. Tamad lemer v'hu eid v'ariyichin edav. That's a case of being miyachad Edom, even if he didn't call them out by name. But he referenced their location where they're standing in the room. He says, Kalaim denetzli. That's good enough. Okay, Zukt, the Gemara weiter. The fourth case in the Mishnah was, if they know Eid Mapiyed, or one of them is a Karv apostle, they're potter if they make a Shevuos Eidus because they're not Royal Hayed. Ton Rabbanon. A brisa echoing this Mishnah, Amr l'shnayim esh b'yan elechem pleni matam yoden li'edus shtavay seduni ven yoden li'edus eid mepiyed. They knew Eidus from somebody else. They didn't see it by themselves. Oy shay ech men karv apostle yoch l'chayav and tamad loim lo yagid v'nosav hainoi. It says im lo yagid v'nosav hainoi beru'uyin la'agod ha'kosam adaber. Only an aid that makes a Shevuos Eidus, if he is worthy or qualified to give testimony, that's when, if he denies or is kaifer in the tefillah with a shvuah that he's chayiv. The final case in the Mishnah was Shalach B'yad Avdoi. Tanu Rabbanan. Shalach B'yad Avdoi. The Teveya doesn't go himself, but he sends a messenger, his Eved, to summon Edom to testify on his behalf. Or the Nitba asks on behalf of the Teveya. The Brisa gives us the Makar for this halacha. They have to hear from Teveya Atzmai because it says Im lo yagid v'nasa avoyna. My Talmud asks the Gemara, where is it mashma the words lo yagid that you have to hear it from the Teveya himself? Rabbi Lazar Im lo yagid ksiv. If you take a look at the word lo, lamed vav aleph, it's spelled. Usually it's either lamed aleph or lamed vav, right? Depending what the Torah is trying to say. But here it's a combination of the two. Lamed vav aleph. So you read it Im loi lo yagid. If to him, directly to him, to the Teveya, you refuse to give Eidos, then v'nasa avoyna but if you're being koifer for his messenger or for the nitba, for somebody else, not for the loy with lamed vav, right, then you are pater. So interesting, we just had Shevuos, and what do we have? We have the Aser Dibros, and the Torah says, V'chala am royim es hakolos. They all saw the sounds, right? It seems like a superfluous miracle. Why do we have to see the sounds? So they say over Shem Dechidusharim, the Svasemes, they say because if they just would have heard loy signov, right, they could have interpreted it as loy signov, lamed vav. Yeah, loy signov, you should steal from him. Or loy sirtzach. So they had to see, royim es hakolos, that's see the lamed aleph. That loy signov, don't steal. Usually we hear what we want to hear. Right? The joke of somebody parks in a parking spot, it says no parking, right? No parking allowed. So the owner said, didn't you see my sign? He says, yeah, I read it. No! Parking allowed! Avadi, you're allowed to park here, right? You can always dray and twist. If it's not clear, you can dray and twist. But over here, this is a very unique situation where you have lamed vav aleph, loy loy. Which am loy loy, then v'nasa avaynai. Okay, so you have to hear in Piyat Teveya Atzmai. If the Teveya summons Edom to testify on his behalf with the Lashon of Mashbi'ani or Metzavani or Sarchamani, there's also Chayavim. Now we know that you need to make a Shevuah, to be Chayiv and a Shevuos Eidus, or any Shevuah, you have to use Hashem's name. So what if you didn't use Hashem's name? What if you used B'Shamayim V'Aretz as a reference to Hashem? Harei lo P'turin, they're potter. B'Alav Dalet, B'Yud Hei, B'Shakai, B'Tzvokas, B'Chana, B'Racham, B'Rachapayim, B'Rav Chesed, V'chol HaKinuyin Harei lo Chiyovin. Right? Even if you don't have the Shem HaMeyuchad, if you have a kinui, if you have a reference, a name that is referring to Hashem, right? Then it's also enough. Ha'Mekalel B'Kulan Chayiv, Divrei Reb Meir. Reb Meir says the same holds true for Mekalel, Megadif. Right, somebody curses Hashem. Doesn't have to curse Hashem with the Shem HaMiyuchad. Even if he uses Racham, Chana, Rechapayim, Mekinoi, he's also Chayiv Skila. V'chamam Paiter, Chomim say no has to be Shem HaMiyuchad. Same Achloikas B'Makal of V'imay B'Kulan Chayiv. Somebody curses his mother and his father, right? Issa Torah, and there's a chiv skill of their Eid ben Asro, then he's chayiv, even though he didn't curse with Shem HaMiyuchad, he cursed his mother and father with a kinui. Divrei Reb Meir. Chacham say, no, even that you need only Shem HaMiyuchad, but kinuyim doesn't work. You're not chayiv on that. What about you curse yourself or your friend? Here you're over only on a lois asay. Okay, the Gemara is going to talk more about this. Yakcha Hashem. What if the Teveya was mashbia the aid not with a lashon Shevuos, but he said Yakcha Hashem if you don't come give testimony, or v'chein Yakchem Elokim Zoy Ulak Allah Ksuva b'Torah. This is a lashon Shevuos and the Torah, and it works. Al Yakcha. What if the Teveya says to the aid Hashem shouldn't smite you if you come give testimony, or Yivarechecha, Hashem should bench you if you come give testimony on my behalf. Yetev l'cha, should do good for you. Rabbi Meir Mechayev, Rabbi Meir says that's also a lashon Shevuos. Why? Because it's mechlalav at the from the fact that he says al yakcha, mashma that if you don't give testimony, then yakcha. That's a lashon Shevuos. Mechlalav at the shmeihen. Chacham poiter and Chacham say no, it doesn't work. You have to clearly say yakcha Hashem if you don't give testimony. Okay, now the Gemara is going to go back to the first halacha of the Mishnah of Metzavani Aleichem Beserchem Ani. Harei L'Chayavin. So the Gemara says, Mashbiani Aleichem Maika Amar. Amar Rav Yidu Achakam. Mashbiani Aleichem B'Shavua Amar B'Torah. Metzavani Aleichem B'Tzava Amar B'Torah. Beserchem Ani B'Isra Amar B'Torah. He's referencing to the Edom when he summons them to give testimony. He says, swear to me that you don't have testimony B'Shavua Amar B'Torah or B'Tzava Amar B'Torah or Isarchem B'Isra Amar B'Torah. So those work. That's Rav Yuda's explanation of the Mishnah. Amar le'abai, Sabai said, Elo hadetani Reb Chia kavelchem ani arei l'chayav, and he adds the lashon of kavelchem, koivel be'eraisa miksiv. Kavelchem is like to chain you, right? Bechavlei barzel, right, with metal chains. So we don't find the shirish koivel in the Torah, chamisha chamsha Torah. So the question is, how could be chayiv if he's referencing a lashon in the Torah by tzava and by iser, so who adin by kavelchem, and there's no lashon of kovel in the Torah. Elam Rabbi Yoel. So must be the pshat is different. Mashbiani Aleichem b'Shavua, Metzavani Aleichem b'Shavua, Oisrechem b'Shavua, Kavelchem b'Shavua. He's always mentioning Shavua at the end, and that's what the Mishnah is referring to. I see in the bottom the Rash, but he's not saying, Abai doesn't mean he's saying the Lashon Shevuos here. He just says the Shem Hashem, which is usually said with a Shevuos. Okay. So the Gemara weiter. The Mishnah said, Ba'alav Daled, B'yud Hei, B'shake, B'tzvokas, B'chanu V'racham, Berach Apayim, B'rav Chesed. So the Gemara asks, L'memra, D'chanu V'racham, Shemus Nenu, you want to tell me that these are Shemus of Hashem and it works if you use it in a Shevuos? Ramini, Yashem Shenim Chakim, Yashem Shenim Chakim. There are names of Hashem that you're allowed to erase, and there are names you're not allowed to erase. Ela Hashem she'enim chakim. Kol keil elkecha lekim elkeichem eka asher eka alav dalad v'yud and hey shaka tzvokos harei elu einim chakim. Those are names of Hashem you can't erase. Aval hagodol like you have another adir achazek amitz izos chanem v'rachom erapayim rav chesed areilim chakim. So what do you see from here? It's a stira. Our Mishnah says racham v'chanan erech apayim are all shemus of Hashem, and if you make a Shevuos with that shame, then you're chayiv. So how could you erase it? The other brisa says that those are not names that are included in the lav l'sas and kel Hashem elkeichem. You're allowed to erase it. Rabbi Masnisim, our Mishnah is talking about when the Teveya was mashbia the Edom with Chanun. When he said Chanun, he meant b'mishu hu Chanun. Right? He didn't say Chanun. He said b'mishu Chanun, b'mishu hu Racham. His kavanah is to go b'mishu Chanun, b'mishu hu Racham. Amalei Rabbi Yachim b'shamayim v'oretz nami. Eibazei b'shamayim v'oretz. So in other words, Chanun itself is not a Shem Kaddish. Chanun itself is not a holy name. You're allowed to erase it. But when the Mashbiya, when the Teveya says Chanun, he's referencing B'mishu hu Chanun, and that's why it works by a Shevuos. So Rabbi said, Yochim v'shamayim v'aretz nami. Why does the Mishnah say b'shamayim v'aretz? It doesn't work. Say, explain it the same way. B'misha shamayim v'aretz shaloi kalmar. It's referencing Hashem. Hachiyash. The Gemara says, no, you can't compare shamayim v'aretz to Racham v'chanan. Hosam, over there by Chanun and Racham, kivud lakem yidachmin deikar Racham v'chanan. There's nothing else that's called a Racham and a Chanun. Vada b'misha vadai. So must be Avadi is mentioning the one, right? There's only one being in the entire universe that's called the Racham and Achanan. True Racham and Achanan is the B'nai Shleilam. Right? Hagam, we know that the Gemara Shabbos says that V'alachta b'drachav means Mahu Racham, Afata Racham, Mahu Chanan, Afata Chanan. So how could the Gemara say the only Hashem is called a Racham and a Chanan? What do you mean? We are required to become a Racham and a Chanan, just like Hashem. So when he says Racham, Mechetes Hashem, maybe it's somebody else who is like Hashem in that way. So the Gemara over here says that nobody else is a Racham. Leka midei achrini de'ikar Racham v'Chanan. Yeah, it's a kasha. And Teretz is Pasha. Teretz is Avada. We can't achieve. We can't come to the state of Racham v'Chanan like Hashem Mamish. It means we have to work our way up to become like that. But are we ever going to reach that level? Yeah, it's like when we say Kadoshim Tiyu. Yeah, so Ki Kodesh Ani. So Chazal say, you want to be Ki Kodesh Ani, that's why you should be Kodesh Ki Kodesh Ani. What's pshat in the pasuk? So the Medrash says, Yochel Kamoini, Talmud Loimar, Ki Kodesh Ani, I'm different. You can't be like me. You can't have my Kedusha. Right? Kedushim Ti, you have to try to become Kaddish, right? Be holy, but not holy. The Kaddish Ani, I'm separate. I'm mamish separate. Yochel Kamoini, Talmud Loimar Ki Kodesh Ani. No, I'm separate. I'm different. I'm the only one that has, really, that is termed with the accolade of Kaddish, right? So who had then Racham v'Chanan? Avada, we have to try to become a Racham, just like we have to try to become a Kedoshim. But Yochel Kamoini, he's the only Racham v'Chanan, and that's what the Gemara says. Like midei achrini de'ikar Racham v'Chanan. By the way, the originator on that Chazal of Kedoshim Tiyu Yochel Kamoini Talmud Loimar Ki Kodesh Ani, he has a different pshat. This is Hasidish. It wouldn't stem with our Gemara. He says Kedoshim Tiyu, you should be holy. Yochel Kamoini, you could be like me. How? Talmud Loimar, learn to tell yourself, Ki Kodesh Ani, that I'm holy. Every Yid can be holy. How? By reinforcing the belief that he is holy. Okay, but Akaponim, here the Gemara says, only Hashem is called a Racham and a Chanan, B'mishu Chanan, B'mishu Racham, that's why it's for sure a reference to Hashem. But Hocha, by Shemaim and Oretz, Kimin De'ikar Shemaim v'Oretz, by Shemaim v'Oretz Ka'amar. Since they're Shemaim and Oretz, right, they're separate entities, we know Shemaim is Shemaim and Oretz is Oretz. So when he says by Shemaim v'Oretz, it doesn't necessarily translate as B'misha Shemaim v'Oretz Shaloi. It means, it could be Shemaim v'Oretz, the way we reference Shemaim and Oretz, right, the heavens and the earth. Okay. So that's why it doesn't work. Ton Rabbanan, Kosev Aleph Lamed Me Elikim. If he wrote the first two letters of the word Elikim, or Yud and a K, Hashem, first two letters of Yud K Vav K, Hareza and Nimcha, because those themselves Shemus of Hashem. Kel and Ka are also Shemus of Hashem. What about Shin Dalad Mishaka, or Aleph Dalad Me'adna, Tzadi Beis Mitzvokas, Hareza and Nimcha? Those two letters, the first two letters of those names are not Shemus of Hashem. Rabbi Yosef Mitzvah is Kula Nimchak. You can actually erase the whole thing. Likr Tzvois El Hashem Yisrael. Right? It's a reference to Klal Yisrael, Shenemar, V'hoitzaisi es Tzivoisai, es Ami b'nei Sol Meretz Mitzrayim, so it's not really Hashem. Amar Shmuel, Ein Alocha Rabbi Yosi. Alocha is not like Rabbi Yosi. Can't rely on that, you can't erase the name Tzvokos. So the Gemara Tanur Rabbanu Kol Tafel Hashem. Anything that's a prefix or a suffix, anything that's a tafel to the Shem of Hashem, Bein Milfon of Bein Ma'achar, Bein Nimchak. Lefon of Keitzad, La Hashem, Lamed Nimchak, Ba Hashem, Beis Nimchak, Va Hashem, Vav Nimchak, Me Hashem, Mem Nimchak, Sha Hashem, Hashem Nimchak, Ha Hashem, Hay Nimchak, Ka Hashem, Eskof Nimchak. La'achrav Keitzad, what about the suffix? Elikeinu nun vav nimchak. Elikeihem hey mem nimchak. Elikeihem chof mem nimchak. Acheir moimrim, Meir says, la'achrav ein nimchak. No, at the end, the suffix you can't erase. Shekvar kitcha Hashem, because once it follows the Shem Hashem, so it becomes a part of Shem Hashem, and it's kitcha Hashem, you can't erase it. Now, interestingly enough, over here at the bottom of the article, they bring down from the Rambam. The Rambam says that what if somebody, according to Meir, according to Acherim, erases the nun vav, right, the suffix of Hashem Hashem, he doesn't get malchus al tzleisas and kein l'Hashem alekechem. Why not? Because the svara that you're not allowed to erase the nun vav, the suffix, is only because shekvar kitche Hashem. It got kedusha from the Shem Hashem preceding it, but it doesn't mean that itself becomes the Shem Hashem. So Mamil, if you erase it, there's no malchus. There's malchus mardis with Rabbanon, but there's no malchus. Amar Ravuna alocha kacherim taka with paskin like kacherim. Don't erase the nun vav of Elokeinu or the hey mem alakeyem, chaf mem alakechem. Okay, zug de'elu Gemara weiter. Now we're talking about the Shemus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Gemara called Shemus ha'amurim ba'Torah ba'Avram kodesh chutz mizeh shulchayil. All the names that appear in the parsha of Avram Avinu is all kodesh except for the following: Shenemar v'yomer adoinoyim no matzasi chen b'einechem. That's chayil. Why is that chayil? Because Avram Avinu was talking to the Malachim. He was addressing the middle one, the oldest one, the Baschash of Malach, and he said, "Please, my master, stay with me, so I can invite you in and be my guests." So the Gemara says, Chanina ben Achi Rishur, Rabbi Elazar ben Azar, Shem Rabbi Elazar Madoi, Amru, Avzeh Kodesh. No, this is also Kodesh. Why? Because it references to Hashem. Because he was sitting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Vayera Elov Hashem Be'eloinei Mamrei, right? He came to visit him, B'shlishi Le'Milasai, and he said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please, let me go to Achnosas Archon, Kaman Azlo, Hodom Rav Yudam Rav, G'doi L'Achnosas Archon, Yosem Kol Fnei Shchini, Kaman Ka'oisa Azug. Right? This matches, this fits with the famous memra of Rav Yudam Rav, who says that Avram Avinu, we learned from Avram Avinu, G'doi L'Achnosas Archon, Yosem Kol Fnei Shchini, because he said to Hashem, wait, Al Nosavim Alavdecha, let me go and invite these guests in. Now, Rav Noach Wienberg, the founder of Eish HaTorah, I remember I was working for Eish for a while, doing Kiruv, Eish UK, and one of my first introductions to Rav Noach Wienberg was the following question. He asked, we learned from Avram Avinu that G'doi L'Achnos Zachem Yosef V'Kvalas Pnei HaShechina, but how did Avram himself know that? Where did Avram Avinu get it from? He's sitting with the Shechina herself, the Rebbeinu Shloim, and he says, Al Nosavim Alavdecha, I'm going to go be a Makabel Dizorchem. How did he know he's allowed to do that? We know from him, but where did Avram Avinu get it from? So Rav Noach Wienberg used to say, and this is Moyerdig, big aside, he said, Avram Avinu understood that, of course, it's gewaldig to be with the Shechina. It's great to be with Hashem. But you know what's even greater? The only thing greater than being with Hashem is being like Hashem. If you could be like Hashem, then you're even closer. Because closeness in the physical world is based on proximity, right? If I'm close to you, if you're a couple of feet away, I'm closer to you than the guy who is a couple of miles away. Yeah, that's measured in proximity. Closeness in spirituality is measured in similarity. If I'm similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the more similar I am, the closer I am. So, En Chanami, Avram knew HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mamash, the presence of the Shekhinah was right there with him. But that's only in proximity with Hashem. But what's even greater than being with Hashem is being like Hashem, because that's the ultimate form of closeness when it comes to spirituality, and therefore he knew that G'doi L'Achnos Zachem Yoser Makbalas Pnei HaShechina. So the Gemara Vayta, Kol Shem Yisrael Beloit Choyel. All the names that are said by Loit is also Choyel, Chutz Mizeh Shu Kodesh, except for one time, right? It's the opposite. Avram Avinu, all is Kodesh except for one for Choyel. Light is, everything is Choyel except for this one. So what was he referring to? He was referring to the Hashem, Mishiyesh B'yod Elohim Sala'achiyaz HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That was the name of Hashem. Kol Shem Esamurim Ben Novis Kodesh. What about Novis Israeli? We know the story that Zevel framed him as being a Merid B'Malchus, and she ended up killing because Achav wanted his vineyard. And in the story of Novis Israeli, all the Shemus over there are Kodesh, but Micha Choyel. But by Micha, he did the Avodah Zarah. Where do we have Micha? We had Micha in... we had him in Sanhedrin, and we had him above Basra as well.
Kafalov, Micha, in Perek Chelik, right?
We had him in Perek Chelik, right? Do we have him in Baba Basra? In Yesh Neuchlan?
I don't remember, maybe. Possible.
Yeah.
We definitely had him in Sanhedrin.
Yeah, we had him in Yesh Neuchlan in the...
Menashe.
Yeah, Menashe and Gershon. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right, okay, but either way, it's geschmack whenever we had a Gemara already, right? We have to mention it.
The other one.
Yeah. You know, they say, Rabbi Akiva Eiger, sometimes on the side of the Gemara in Gilyon HaShas, whenever there is a Gemara and there's another reference to the Gemara, he finds it somewhere else, he writes it on the side. So, who said it? It's like tzitzin prachin. It's like the flowers, the decorations on the side of the Gemara are all the reference points that you can make when you see one Gemara that, it's also here, it's in Horis, it's here, but it's like no different Masechtas, Bava Basra, Sanhedrin. It's beautiful. That's the Tzitzin HaPrachan of Torah. So Gemara says, Kol Shem Samurim Ben Novus Kodesh, Micha Chodesh, Beliezer Ben Novus Kodesh, Micha Yesh Men Chol, Yesh Men Kodesh, some and some. So, Aleph Lamed, Choyel. Anytime it says Aleph Lamed, like Elokim, Elokeinu, that's all Choyel. That's referring to Avodah Zarah. What about Yud and a Hey? That's Kodesh. Chutz Mizeh, Sha'alef Lamed V'u Kodesh, it's also Kodesh. Which one? Kol Yemei Yois Beis V'Elokim B'Shiloi. By the way, you have to know, why is it so important to know which one is Chol, which one is Kodesh? Because you have to know which Shemus can be in the Mechakim. Kol Shemus Amurim Begivas Ben Yamin, Rabbi Eliezer Mechoil, Rabbi Yeshua Emer Kodesh. So the story with Givas Ben Yamin was that they fought with Klal Yisrael after the story with Pelagish Begival, and Klal Yisrael wanted to know, they went to fight with Shevet Ben Yamin 3 times. On 3 separate occasions they asked whether they should go to war. Right? The first 2, they asked we should go or not go, and they were told to go, but then they lost. And the 3rd time they were told to go, and they won. So the Gemara says, in that interaction between Klal Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when they asked the Urim V'Tumim whether they should go to Milchama with Bnei Binyamin, right? So the first two times they lost. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yeshua, what do you mean? But says it has to be chayil. It has to be they asked Avodah Zarah, not Hashem. Why? Because they were told to go and they lost. So if it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if it's kodesh, if it's referencing Hashem, then is it possible maftiach ve'eino isa? Rabbi Yeshua says no. Mashaftiach also. The truth is it was Hashem. They asked all three times. It's referencing Hashem, and therefore it's all kodesh. You're going to ask me they lost? No. Mashaftiach also. V'hem lo bichnu im l'ntzayich im l'natzeach. Rashi explains they didn't ask whether they're going to win or not. They asked whether they should go to war or not. You have to be so careful in how you verbalize it, because they didn't verbalize it correctly. So they got a tshuva to what they asked for, but they didn't get the end result because that wasn't included in their question. So hem bichnu im l'ntzayich im l'natzeach. B'achreina, in the end, in the third time, shebichnu, that they were able to clarify what they were asking, and they asked Kahagan, Hiskim al Yod, and the Urim V'Tumim said, yes, you'll win, and that's when they won. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Alu ki mocher etnenu b'yadecha, is the end over there, and Avada v'yigav Hashem as Binyamin l'fnei Yisrael, Binyamin lost the war. Okay, Kol Shleim Umrim Shir Shirim Kodesh. All the Shleimas and Shir Hashirim is Kodesh. Right? Because it's referring to Shir L'misha Shalom Shaloi. Shleima is referring, that's Mashmoyas is Shir L'misha Shalom Shaloi. Shir Hashirim Asher L'Shleima is referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which by the way could answer a question I once heard from Yisrael David Schlesinger. He once asked, that Shlomo Melech wrote 3 Sfarim, right? He wrote Mishlei, Kehelis, and Shir Hashirim. What's really interesting is that in Kehelis and Mishlei, Shlomo Melech introduces himself Shlomo ben David Molach B'Yerushalayim. He was Melech. He tells us who he was, his lineage, his father, his yichus, and what he did for a living. He was king of Yerushalayim. In Shir Hashirim, all he says is Shir Hashirim Asher L'Shlomo, and he goes straight in Yishkenim and Shikas Piu Kitavim Dedechem Yoy, and he goes through the whole Shir Hashirim without mentioning his yichus, the way he does it in Mishlei and Kehelis and his other Sfarim, and he doesn't mention what he did for a living. What's the pshat? So Yisrael David Schlesinger said, pshat is because Mishlei and Kehelis is full of musar. If you ever want to give somebody a musar, you better introduce yourself properly first. Tell me who you are. Tell me what you do for a living and why you're worthy of giving me musar. But Shir Hashirim is full of compliments, right? The relationship, the wonderful relationship we have with Hashem. Anybody can give a compliment. You just have to be Shloima, Yoel, doesn't matter who you are. That was his answer al derech tzachos. But in our Gemara, it seems to say that the Shloima, even the Shloima itself, is referring to Hashem. Yeah, Shir Hashirim Hashem Shloima Shir L'Misha Shalom Shaloi. So chutz mizeh, there's only one pasuk in Shir Hashirim where Shloima is referring to himself, which is the pasuk of Kar Mishli L'Fanai Elef L'Cha Shloima. Shloima L'Didei, right? He's referring to taking 1,000 for himself. U'Masayim L'Noitrim Aspiriyai. At 200, he left for Avodas Hashem. That's the Rabbanan, the Chachmei HaTorah. V'yashayimrim, and some say Av Zeh Chayil. There's another pasuk that is also Chayil. Which is that pasuk? Hine Metasa Shel Shloima Shishim Gebayrim Saval Megebayrim Yisrael. They had the 60 Gebayrim. Shloima had anxiety, suffered from anxiety after the story with Ashmedai, so he needed 60 Gebayrim. By the way, some say the 60 Gebayrim are referring to the 60 letters in Yivarecha Hashem V'Yishmerecha Yor Hashem Panav Alecha V'Choneko. We had it around his bed. That was the Gebayrim that served as protection. But either way, that Shloima is also Choyel. He's referring to himself. Gemara says, Avzeh, it sounds like the second Yeshayimrim, the second Manda Omar, agrees to the first one, where Karmi Shilu Lefana Elef L'Chashleim is also Choyel. But in addition to that, he says, Hina Metas L'Chashleim is also Choyel. Gemara says, Allah, Shmuel, if you're going to say that, so when Shmuel says, Malchus Dekat L'Chad B'Shisa Ba'alma, L'Mi Ansham, that when a Malchus that kills 1/6 of its citizens, in other words, it's Megayis, it takes 1 out of every 6 people it takes for the Avodas HaMelech, for the army, for the government. Lo mi'ansha, that doesn't, they don't get nana. Shenemar, why? Because you see Shlomo Melech did that. Kamish lefana elef l'chashloima, l'malchusa derikia, right? U'masayim lo t'maspiriya l'malchusa da'ara, right? He took from 1,200, he took 200 for his own service, and 1,000 he left for Hashem's service. So you see that 1/6, up to 1/6, you're allowed to take for the government, for the kingdom. But what do you see from here? Shmuel, look at Tanakama, look at Yeshayimrim. Shmuel won't fit with the Tanakama who explained the pasuk in the opposite way, where he said Shlomo took 1,000 and left 200 for Avodas Hashem, and it won't be like the Yeshayimrim. right? Because the Yeshayimrim say that pasuk is referring to kodesh. It's shleim is kodesh. Malachi kamer. V'Yeshayimrim zeh kodesh v'zeh chayil. No, you have to say the Yeshayimrim. Taka argues with the pasuk with Tanakama that Karmi Shlofan Elf Chashleima is kodesh. He says it's chayil, and Taka he'll explain it like Shmuel. That Tana will hold like Shmuel that Shlomo Melech took only 200 and left 1,000 to avodas Hashem. So the Gemara says Shmuel the Omer ki Yeshayimrim, and Shmuel will say like the Yeshayimrim. Now, Sefer Daniel, Kol Machaya Mur Daniel Choil Chutz Mezeshu Kodesh. Anytime it says Mal Chayo in the story of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, it's all Choil. It's referring to the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel, except for this place, Ant Malka Melech Malchaya. Melech Malchaya, the king of kings, Delosh Shmai Malchus Chizna V'Tagma V'Yikari Havlach. That's referring to Hashem, and that's Kodesh. V'yesh Ayminim, Abzeh Kodesh, another one that's Kodesh. Nema Morech Helma Lasanach Episha La'arach. So Gemara says, Laman Ka'amar, Isal Gedaitach. Laman Ka'amar, who is this, who's Daniel talking to in those words? When you say that that's Kodesh, right, who's he talking to? Isal Gedaitach Nebuchadnezzar Ka'amar Lei. If you're going to tell me that he's talking about Nebuchadnezzar's son, who say Ma'aninu Yisrael? Meilat Kalait Lahu Yisrael, what do you mean? Is he talking to Nebuchadnezzar that Morai Chelma Lasanach, your dream should come true, and all your sons should be eradicated? How could that not be Kodesh? Yeshamrim are probably right. How could you argue on that? Right? L'chayr is not talking to Nebuchadnezzar. Otherwise, you'd be telling Nebuchadnezzar that all your sonim, Dahainu Klal Yisrael, should be wiped out. Is it possible that Daniel would curse Klal Yisrael? So Gemara says, "V'tanakama sabra, v'tanakama old son Yisrael ikasayda l'kavim leka." What do you mean? He has a lot of sonim. When Daniel said that your dream should come true, your son should be wiped out, he's not referring to Hashem. He can be referring to Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar had other sonim besides your Klal Yisrael. He's referring to the other sonim, not Klal Yisrael. Okay, so Machloek is in that pasuk whether Moreh Chelma is referring to Hashem or it's referring to Nebuchadnezzar. So the Gemara weiter, Kinuyin, v'chol Kinuyin arei l'chayovin. We saw in the Mishnah that if the Teveya was Mashbiya, the Edom, with one of the names of Hashem, even with Kinuyin, and they were Kofer, then they're Chayev. Asks the Gemara Stira. Rameni, it says by the parasha of Soita, Yitan Hashem oisach la'olav l'shvua, ma tamud loymar. Why does it say the pasuk, Yitan Hashem oisach la'olav l'shvua? It's superfluous. V'aloi kvar nemar. It says by Soita already. Previously, v'yishbiya koyne se'isha b'shvua sa'olah. So why do you have to repeat? Why does the Torah have to repeat Yitan Hashem oisach la'olav l'shvua if it already says b'shvua sa'olah? It mentions both, shvua sa'olah. Mar says, l'fisha nemar. You know why? Because that pasuk, Yitan Hashem oisach la'olav l'shvua, is extra. It's mufnis for Gzeir Shava, to make it available for Gzeir Shava, to learn Shevuos Ha'edus from there. Lefisha Nemar, because that's by Shevuos Ha'edus Shama Koil Olam, Nemar Kan Olam. It says by Soita Olam. The Nemar Lahalon, by Shevuos Ha'edus Olam. Makan, just like by a Soita. Ola is a Lashon of Shavua. Af Lahalon, Shavua, so to by Shevuos Ha'edus, you should learn is a Lashon of Shavua. And Makan, and just like by Soita, it's B'Shem. It's only with the Shem HaMeyuchad. It says Yitan Hashem Oisach, Yitan Hashem. Af La'alon, by Shevuos Ha'edus, you only have a carbon if it's B'Shem. So Kasha, ding, 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 ding. The Mishnah says even Kinuyin. And over here, we learn Shevuos Ha'edus from Shevuos Soita, from Soita. And by Soita, it says clearly Yitan Hashem Oisach La'alav Shvuah, only B'Shem. Rabbi Loy Kasha. No, it's not a steer. Har B'chnin Ra'idi, Har Rabbanan. Machloek is Tanoim. The Tanya will not Braisa. B'chnin B'rido Omer Hoil V'Amr Torah Yishava. Since we find the Torah is Mechayiv Yonah Shavua, right, by Shevuos HaPikodim, Va'al Teshava, and it says, don't swear Lasheker, right? So there's a mitzvah to swear, Shevuos HaShaimrim, Shevuos HaShem Tiyah Beit Shneim, yeah, a mitzvah to swear, but sometimes it's an isser to swear, right? Al Shabash Mil HaShoker, Kalel. Sometimes it's a mitzvah to curse, Saita, she gets an Ola, right, when she drinks the cursed waters. Va'al Tekal, sometimes it's a mitzvah not to curse, right? The Luhem Le'Sekalel. So Mai, Shava. B'shem, aflois shava b'shem, ma kilo b'shem, aflois kala b'shem. So you have to compare that just like when it's a mitzvah to swear, it's b'shem ha'meyuchad, so too when it's an aveir to swear, it's only if you swear b'shem ha'meyuchad. And when it's a mitzvah to curse, by soita, yitna Hashem oisech la'olah, it's only b'shem Hashem. Aflois kala, when it's an aveir to curse, it's only b'shem. So that's Rav Chanina bar Idi, it's a Tana, who says that it's only b'shem ha'meyuchad that you chayv on Shevuos Ha'edus. So that's that brayso. But Rabbanan argue on that. The Rabbanan say it doesn't have to be dafka b'shem, even b'kinuyin, and our Mishnah comes out like the Rabbanan. Asks the Gemara 1 second. Rabbanan, igmiri gzeir shava, if they have to come out to the gzeir shava from soita, ola, because there's shama koil ola by Shevuos Ha'edus. I don't know ola. How do I know ola is a shavua? Teretz is because you learn it from a Saita. So once I learn from a Saita, Neboy Shem HaMiyuchad, so go all the way. It's because you're Shav from Saita, Allah, so learn that you need Shem HaMiyuchad by Shevuos HaEidus as well, so Kanui shouldn't work. And you like me, if you don't have the Shava, oh, the Shaviyah Manalu, how would they know that Allah is a Shavua? I only know Allah is a Shavua from Saita. So once I compare it to Saita, so learn that it's only B'Shem HaMiyuchad, not the Kanuyim. And if I don't have the Gzeir Shava, then I'm stuck. What does Allah mean? Says the Gemara, no, you don't need the Gzeir Shava from Saita. They know Allah, Nafkaluhu, Midatanya. This brisa, Allah, it says by Shevuos HaEidus, Allah, Ein Allah, Ela Lashon Shavua, V'cheinu Omer, V'eshbi'a Koyen, Esa Isha, B'Shevuas HaAllah. So, V'cheinu Omer, I guess it's not a Gzeir Shava, it's a Mamatino. It shows that the word Allah means a Shavua. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? Awesome, Shevuos HaAllah ksiv. Yeah, over there it doesn't say Allah alone, just like it says by Eidus. It says Shevuos HaAllah. Right? So how do you know Allah alone is a Shavua? Over there it's Shevuos HaAllah. It's a Shavua plus a curse. But how do you know Allah alone is a Shavua? Gemara says, Hachik Amar. So you have to understand the Bryce a little differently. Allah ain't Allah Ela b'Shavua. By, it says Edom, by Allah by Edom, yeah, you have to say Allah is only with a Shavua. You need both. The Gemara says, Manayan, so how do I know? Last is Shavua, she'ein ima Allah, kishavua sheyesh ima Allah. How do I know that a Shavua that doesn't have an Allah with it is like a Shavua that has an Allah with it? It's a Shavua, Allah alone, or Shavua alone is good. Talmud Lamed v'shama koil Allah says the word koil, which is l'chayra extra. Should have said v'shama Allah. Why is it v'shama koil Allah? So from here you learn v'shama Allah, v'shama koil. That it's either one alone is also enough. V'shama koil is referring to koil Shavua bilvad, even without an Allah. So here you have a limud that Edom are chayev when they make a Shevuos HaEidus on one of two koilas. Either a Shavua without an Allah, which is koil, because it's an extra word, or a Shavua with an Allah, which is V'shama Allah, V'shama koil Allah, right? Those are together. Omar Rebavo Manayin LaOlah Shi Shavua. How do I know Allah is Lashon Shavua? Shnei V'yava Oiseh Ba'Olah. It says when Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, when he made a bris with Tzidkiyahu HaMelech, right? It was then the king of Yehuda, was under the rulership of Melech Bavel. Ksiv V'gam Melech Nebuchadnezzar Morad Asher Shbiyoi Be'Elokim. So here, Nebuchadnezzar made an Allah, and then it says that Tzidkiyahu didn't keep the Shavua. So you see from here that Allah is a Lashon Shavua. Okay, we'll stop over here.